In this video, I'm going to give a quick demonstration of the RStudio interface, and I'm going to show you the workflow that I like to use in my own work and that I have my students use. So there's a RMarkdown document in the link to this video called RMarkdown_wordflow.rmd. So if you download that to a folder on your computer somewhere and then open it, it should already be associated with RStudio, assuming you have RStudio installed on your computer. So that's the extension of the file is .rmd, so those files should get automatically opened by RStudio, or you could just open them from the file menu in RStudio. But once you do that, it's going to look like this. So there's the RStudio interface, and you can see that in the upper left quadrant here, you have what's called the source pane. So the source pane contains the contents of the RMarkdown document, and it's just a text file. We can change these guides a little bit to give ourselves a little more real estate there to work with. Now, the thing that you can do with an RMarkdown document in RStudio is convert it to an HTML file that'll be easier to read. So up here in the toolbar, there's an icon called knit. If you click on knit, it will convert this document to HTML, and you can see that where there were hashtags, now those have been transformed into headings and so on. The first time you do this in a new installation of RStudio, it might ask you to install some things. So it's okay to go and let it have permission to do that. You also here can open it in a web browser, and it'll open it in your default web browser, and you can sort of see how everything is nicely formatted. It's also easy to copy and paste these things into emails, and then you get nicely formatted emails, whether you're using code or graphics or whatever. So it's very handy to be able to convert things to HTML, and that's what I have my students do. I have them make HTML files, and then they upload the HTML files to Canvas. One thing you might notice is the HTML file appeared here, you see, in the same folder that I had started with my RMarkdown file. Before I go on, what I want to do is show you how I like to customize this interface. So here in Tools, I can go to Global Options, and I can change the appearance. I like a darker theme, so Solarized Dark is one that I like to use. That just makes everything easier on the eyes. And for RMarkdown, I don't really like that pop-up window. So when it says Show Output Preview for RMarkdown, I'm going to make it go into the Viewer pane. So notice when I do that, and now when I knit, I get my knitted document over here. It just takes up a tab where the file manager used to be, and then it's just a lot easier to see right there. The key feature of RMarkdown documents is the ability to execute R code, and we do that in code chunks. So here's an example of a code chunk. A code chunk just begins with these 3 backward accents and ends with 3 backward accents and has R telling it the language of the code chunk. So these are actually commands in R, even though for now we're just doing basic arithmetic. And if I want to execute a code chunk, I go to this little play button here, and I say Run Current Chunk. Let me zoom that in a little bit so you can see it better. So you see that play button? Click on that, and it took those 3 lines of code and it executed them. So these are just the answers. It's what those echo when those things get executed. So you can make your own code chunk. Like so, I'll go to line 29 and I'll just say insert R. And then you could type in whatever you want, any kind of R code that you want. And hit play, and you'll see the answer to the code chunk down there. One thing you might notice is when the code chunk gets executed, its results get echoed down here in what's called the console. So the console is a place that keeps a running tab of all the things that you've been doing. So I can go back to that last code chunk and say hit play on it again. And notice I get a new, it just repeats it down here in the console. I could also do commands down here in the console, and they would execute just by hitting return in the console. The problem with doing that is it doesn't save what I did. So if I want to save what I do to refer to it later, then I should do it up here and save my work here in this RMarkdown file. if I want to experiment, I can work down here in the console, and then once I've got it working, I can put that into my document up here. So that's really the key reason I like to work in RMarkdown, is it gives me a place I can save comments and I can save my work. So this is the idea of reproducibility, being able to do something that others can reproduce and that I can reproduce later when I come back and look at this. Once you start doing more complicated things in R, you'll want to be able to save things as variables. So let's see how variables work. I'm going to maximize this window so I don't have to look at the console. Now here's a code block with an assignment statement. It's assigning the result of this arithmetic problem to the variable myAnswer. So when I hit play, nothing seems to really happen when I hit play, but I can see the result up here in the environment tab. So the environment tab keeps a record of all the variables that I've defined and given values to. So it tells you the name of the variable and its value. So you see I could go ahead and insert a new code chunk here and make up a variable name. It doesn't matter what you call it. And then use that assignment, which is just a less than sign and a hyphen, and then put something there and hit play. And notice in the environment pane up here in the environment tab, I have that new variable and its value. So why is that important? Well, it's especially important when you want to get data into R and use it. So data in R is stored in a data frame. So a data frame is kind of like a spreadsheet, except the thing about a data frame is every column of the data frame has to have the same number of entries. So it has to be rectangular. You can think of it as one line per observational unit. And then the variables, the columns have to all be the same type, but within the column, but different columns can have different types. So for example, here's a command that reads in some data from a CSV file into a variable called crickets. So now up here in the upper right in the environment tab, I can click that expand triangle, and that's telling me that crickets is a variable, or crickets rather, is a data frame consisting of 3 variables: species, temp, and pulse. So it looks like species there is a character variable, in other words, a categorical variable, and temp and pulse are going to be quantitative variables. If I want to see what that looks like in spreadsheet format, I click on the name, and then I get a tab over here that looks like a spreadsheet. But again, you can't just go and edit this spreadsheet because that wouldn't be a reproducible operation. You want to make sure you're writing code that manipulates your data, not that you're manipulating your data in some secret way using mouse clicks. So that again is the idea of reproducibility in RMarkdown. So that's what my data looks like. So here's a couple statistical tests. There's code right there, and I can execute those. So there's the result of a t-test. Here's how you would do linear regression. So again, most things in R are pretty simple one-liners. There's a link here to a website that I find really helpful that has a lot of code examples of how you can do things in R. For most common statistical tests, you'll find them there. You can also do plots, and there's much nicer graphics than this, but this is just an example showing you that, yeah, if you do some sort of graphics, it does show up there in the RMarkdown document when you execute the code chunk. I'm going to knit one last time just so you can see, the final result here, and open it up in a web browser. And so now you see you've got this really nice formatted document that you could either post on a web page, or you could upload it to Canvas, or you could copy and paste it into something else. One thing I often do is copy and paste something into an email. So if I needed to do regression for someone, I might just copy this and paste it into an email and send it to them. And you'll get all the nice formatting that you get in the code. So that's it. If you want to experiment with this, just download that file, that RMarkdown file that's in the link that annotates this video, and open that in RStudio and see if you can get all this to work. You can experiment with it, you can try some things, try pasting it into an email, see how that works. And hopefully it's a little less mysterious now, and that'll get you going using RStudio.